Giant is a big problem that we have in our lives. So what kind of giant are you facing right now? How are you dealing with it? I hope this message will become very real and very personal for each one of you with the trials and struggles you're going through. I want to begin with some biblical examples. First of all, the people of Israel in Numbers. The people of Israel, God had led them out of the land of Egypt. He had brought them to Mount Sinai, gave them the law, entered into the old covenant with them. Now he had brought them to the edge of the promised land, and he was about to bring them into the land that God had promised them hundreds of years ago to Abraham. And God instructed Moses to send 12 spies out into the land, one man from each tribe, and they explored the land, looked it over, examined the country, and then they came back to give a report. The 10 spies said, we are not able to go up against this people, for they are too strong for us. The land through which we have gone, is in spying it out, is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight as we were in their sight. So the 10 spies came back with a very bad report. But there were 2 other spies, Joshua and Caleb. And they said, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us to this land and give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. 2 very different reports. And Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take the possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. So let's do a comparison here. The 10 spies said it's a bad land, that the people are giants. We are like grasshoppers, even in our own sight compared to them. And no, sorry, we can't take this land. There's no way. On the other hand, Joshua and Caleb said, no, it's a good land. It's fruitful. Land flowing with milk and honey. God will deal with the giants in the land. God will give us the land, so let's go get it. It's ours. Can you see the difference between the 2 perspectives? Not hard to tell. We'll come back to that later. I want to go to another example, very familiar story of David and Goliath. So the Philistines and the Israelites faced each other on opposite hills, with the valley between them. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. And he was over 9 feet tall. Now, I'm 6'1". Imagine somebody standing 3 feet taller than me, and obviously much bigger, and he had very heavy armor on and very powerful weapons. Boy, this guy was quite something. And so he came, and Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. And he said, why are you all coming out to fight? He called, I am the Philistine champion, but you are only, notice how he puts them down, you're only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down and to fight with me. And if he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send a man who will fight us now, or fight me. So, what was Saul and his army's response? When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. And a little later, as soon as the Israelites' army saw him, they began to run away in fright. Nobody was going to go out there and fight this giant. Now it so happened that David was tending his father's flocks near Bethlehem, and Jesse the father sent him to where Saul's army was to bring provisions for some of his brothers who were in the army. So David happened to be there one day when this giant stood up and made his taunt. He did this for 40 days. And so what was David's response? His response is, who is this pagan Philistine anyway that he should defy the armies of the living God? Who does this guy think he is? You're a servant. David had been brought before Saul because people had heard his words, and he was talking with King Saul about going to fight Goliath. He had offered to do that. And David said, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And David said to him, excuse me, I'm jumping too fast here. So Saul says, go ahead and try it. So David goes out to face and comes toward Goliath. Goliath says, I'm going to wipe you out. And David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts and the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you, that all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel, and all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword and the spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So again, we have these two different perspectives. Saul and his army compared themselves to Goliath. As I just did. I'm 6'1", he's 9 feet tall, so much bigger. Who can fight him? There's nobody that we're willing to do that. We can't possibly defeat Goliath. He's too big. So they fled from him in fear. But then there's David. Maybe in his late teens, a shepherd. But David compared Goliath to God. How big is this giant compared to God? He's nothing. David said God will defeat the giant. And so he ran toward him with courage. Again, two very different perspectives. One more example I want to use goes to the New Testament, where Matthew chapter 8, Jesus and his disciples are in a boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee is known for its fierce storms that can come up rather suddenly. And that's exactly what happened. Then Jesus got into the boat and started across with his disciples. Suddenly a fierce storm struck the lake, and the waves were breaking into the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. So imagine that scene. You're out on a boat, Sea of Galilee. I don't know how big the boat was, but this mother of all storms shows up, and the wind is howling, the rain is pouring down, huge waves come crashing over it. Maybe we could compare it to Hurricane Ian. I don't know. But it's severe. and the boat is filling with water, and the disciples, and a number of them were experienced fishermen. You know, they've been on this lake their whole life, so probably not the first time, but they're doing everything they can to try to save themselves, but they reach the conclusion that, hey, we're doomed, we're going to drown here. But Jesus, they look over at Jesus, and what's he doing? He's in the back of the boat, laying out on a cushion, taking a nice little nap. Sound asleep. Perfectly relaxed, perfectly at peace. And so they do what we would have done. The disciples went and woke him up, shouting, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." And then Jesus asked them a very strange question. He said, "Why are you afraid? Why are you afraid?" If I'd been there, I'd have said, "Well, duh, look around you. We got this huge storm going on here, and you guys, why we're afraid?" But I think the point of the question is, why are you afraid? Because I'm not. And he said, "Why are you afraid, you men of little faith?" And then he got up and rebuked the winds and the sea, and it became perfectly calm. So again, we have two different perspectives. The disciples were terrified and overwhelmed by the storm. They literally thought they were going to perish. We're going to drown out here. They believed they were going to die. And I think they felt abandoned by Jesus. In fact, in Mark's version of this story, they woke him up saying, "Master, don't you care that we're perishing?" I think this is pretty common when people are facing crisis. Where's Jesus? Don't you care, God, that we're going through all this? Is God asleep? But then there's Jesus, his side of it. He was sleeping peacefully in his Father's care. That's where Jesus always dwelt. He says, "I'm in my Father, and my Father is in me. And my Father is in charge of everything." And so in that shield of faith in his Father, Jesus was able to sleep even in the midst of a storm. Again, he asked, "Why are you afraid? Why are you so afraid?" Why wasn't Jesus afraid? Because he knew that he was in his Father's hands. The storm was in his Father's hands. Well, I have to admit, Jesus did have one thing going for him. Because he knew why he had been sent into the world. He knew that this was not his time. He knew that God hadn't sent him into the world to drown in the Sea of Galilee, right? So he was okay. The disciples, I mean, think about it. They had God in the boat with them, but they were terrified. So Jesus calmed the storm. He just spoke and said, "Peace, be still." And the wind stopped, the waves calmed down, and it was perfectly calm. The peace of Christ just took over that whole scene. But Jesus was already experiencing that peace in that boat in the midst of the storm. The disciples were not. So now let's talk about how all of this applies to us. First of all, it's a question of focus. Focus. We often focus on the giant, don't we? The 10 spies compared themselves to the giant and said, we're like grasshoppers. Saul and his army compared themselves to Goliath and says, we can't possibly defeat him. The disciples compared themselves to the storm. And from their perspective, it was huge, overwhelming, life-threatening. We're going to die. We're helpless. That was their focus. If we focus on the giant, the proper focus, of course, is on God. Joshua, the 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, compared the giants to God and said, hey, those guys are the grasshoppers. In fact, it even says that. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. How big were those giants to God? They were bugs. Easily squashed, nothing to be afraid of. And that's the perspective Joshua and Caleb had. Those giants are no problem. God has taken their protection away from them. He's going to drive them out. Let's just go in and take what God has promised us. David compared the Goliath to God. How big was Goliath to God? Again, he was nothing. From a human perspective, he was huge, powerful, mighty. Against God, he's nothing. He was taunting the armies of the living God, and that's what offended David so much. Why does he get to do that? Reminds me of an ant crawling up onto a railroad track and shaking his fist at the oncoming train and says, I'm going to derail you. No contest. That's how David saw it. There's no contest here. Goliath's dead meat. And Jesus, he was God. To the disciples, this storm was huge, overwhelming. But how big was this storm to God? How big was it to Jesus? Just a little, hardly anything. And Jesus proved it. He said, peace, be still. So the giant focus, if we have a giant focus, that's where our focus is. It says this is a huge problem. Huge. How are we ever going to handle this? But a God focus asks, how big is this problem? How big is this giant to God? You see the difference? How big is this problem to God? Now I'm going to pick on someone for a minute. Dan, would you mind coming up here? I want you to stand there where that mark is.
Looking
all right?
this way or this way?
You can keep looking at me, that's fine. See, now I have a dollar bill here. I have my simple question, which is bigger, the dollar bill or Dan? Which is bigger? Dan is. Dan's much bigger than the dollar bill. But you know what? If I hold the bill like this, I can't even see him. From this perspective, this dollar bill is bigger than Dan. Thank you. Have a seat. But this is the way giants are. They get right in your face. They grab your attention. They get your whole focus on them. And when we have that focus, the giant can be bigger than God. And we can be overwhelmed. What's your focus? We have to be careful not to let our focus be dragged away in the crisis of the moment from the one who is in charge. It's also a question of responsibility. Again, the 10 spies believed we are responsible to kill the giants and take the land, and we can't. We have to go in there and fight those guys? There's no way we can defeat them. Saul and his army believed we are responsible to kill Goliath, and we can't. The disciples believed we are responsible to save ourselves in the midst of this storm, but we're losing. Who's responsible? Question of responsibility. The 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, said, the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. The Lord will defeat the giants. The Lord will drive them out. The Lord is going to fight this battle. Let's just go take what he gives us. David, this is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. And the ironic thing is that he used a shepherd boy with a sling to do it. I mean, Saul and his army had all kinds of armor and weapons and spears and swords, and they weren't going to try it. But a slingshot? God loves to do that. He loves to take tiny little things and accomplish great things with them. The battle is the Lord's. Who's responsible to deal with this giant? And of course, Jesus proved that he was God. He just said, peace, be still. And it was still. Question of responsibility. Who's responsible for taking care of the giant that you're facing right now? Is God big enough to handle it? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? And finally, got ahead of myself. The presence of God. The presence of God is the antidote to fear. Even though, all familiar with these words, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because you are with me. You are with me. Your rod and the staff, they comfort me. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. God is present. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change and the mountains slip into the heart of the sea. Boy, that sounds like a pretty dramatic event, doesn't it? The earth, huge earthquake, and mountains are crumbling and things are falling apart, but we will not fear because the Lord is present. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. That's the hand of power. So facing my giants, not fear, for I am with you. I have a very clear memory of when I was a boy. I grew up on a farm in Kansas. We had a big barn on our farm, like most farms do. It was a great place to play, and we milked cows there and stored hay there and equipment and all kinds of stuff that you use a barn for. But I remember on our old black and white television, I watched a TV show one time that was about a very large gorilla that had escaped from a circus train or something. And so this gorilla was kind of rampaging through the country, and in attempts to capture it, it got wounded. And the gorilla took refuge up in the loft of a farmer's barn. And you know how TV shows can try to make things so dramatic. So this farmer comes walking into his barn, not knowing that the gorilla was there. And of course they had this scary music playing. And the last part of the scene that I remember is that he's standing in his barn, and all of a sudden blood starts dripping on him from the gorilla that's right above him. And I don't even remember how the story ends. But what I do remember is that after that, for a long time, I was afraid to go into our barn at night. Daytime wasn't so bad. But I was afraid to go into our barn at night. It was dark, spooky. I remember if I had to go in there, I wouldn't just walk up to the door. I'd come around from the side and reach around and flip the light on and look in. And I go on and flip other lights on, but there's still a lot of dark places in that barn. Where's the giant? But there was one set of circumstances that I was never afraid to go into that barn, and that was when my dad was with me. Because I knew that when my dad is with me, I'm safe. God says, do not fear, for I am with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. So ask yourself, what is my focus as I deal with the giant I'm facing right now? Is my focus on the giant, or is my focus on God? And who is responsible for dealing with this giant? Do I think I'm responsible, that I have to deal with this? Or am I letting God be responsible? Because he is. God will bring victory. God will overcome. God will be with you as you walk through sometimes some very terrible, hard, painful experiences. He says, don't be afraid, for I am with you. I'm holding you by your right hand. What is my focus? Who is responsible? Father, thank you that you are the giant killer God. Thank you that you have given us all of these wonderful examples and all these wonderful promises from your word. That you will never leave us or forsake us. That nothing is too hard for you. And that we can experience the same peace that Jesus had in that boat in the midst of the storm, because Jesus said, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Don't let your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. I pray that your Holy Spirit will take the truth of this message and apply it to every person here with whatever giant they're facing. And may it transform their life and their response to the situation. Pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.